All right, I'm recording.
You don't have to, Sean.
I'm recording.
He sounds so begrudgingly.
You don't have to record. I'll take a transcription of what you say,
Okay.
and then I'll hire a voice actor to enact what you're saying to hide your identity.
I actually pre-wrote my entire script for this episode already, so I'll just email it to you.
Okay, cool.
Can I interview the voice actors beforehand, though? Just to see, like, who's
Yeah.
going to capture my essence the best?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, and I'm joined by my regular co-host, spectator of unexpected but impressive everyday catches, Peter Cook.
Did you see that? It was pretty good.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming, personally.
I didn't either, but I saw it.
I mean, you see it every day, but you just don't know when it's going to happen. And sometimes you just got to sit back and watch.
Exactly.
Yep. We're also, of course, as usual, joined by the third string dishwasher for various unimportant diplomats, Jeremy Ruggles.
I'd be your wingman anytime,
Aw.
Maverick. You guys get that?
Top Gun,
Yeah, who said it, though?
Tom Cruise.
No, Val Kilmer, Iceman.
Oh, wow. How long were you planning that one?
Since we took a 10-minute break before doing this episode.
You boys remember when we first started talking about doing this podcast? About 40-odd episodes ago? I remember one of the things we discussed early on, Jeremy had read some blog post, how to become a rich and successful podcaster. And one of the things they recommended was to not make episodes much longer than half an hour because people would stop paying attention. We've gone over a half an hour a lot lately, and I believe that Peter has promised that he's going to keep this episode brief. And personally, I've always thought that if you could be one thing, you should be efficient. So, Peter, pitter patter.
Let's get at her. So we're going to be doing the Iceman's Band today. Thanks for the little teaser from Jeremy on that one. This is introducing the Iceman's Band. It was released on Mercury in 1972, and I just want to get into things by playing their version of the Lennon-McCartney classic, Come Together, which is side 1, track 2, Jeremy, if you don't mind.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you.
first off, that ruled. And I am here for pretty much every soul jazz cover of a Beatles song. But I got a question. Who is the Iceman, and how is he related to the Eggman?
The Iceman is a man by the name of Jerry Butler.
The original Impressions lead singer, Jerry Butler.
Oh, you know it. Do you know who else was in the Impressions, Sean?
No idea. I only know that Jerry Butler was in the Impressions.
There's another guy named Curtis Mayfield who was also in the Impressions.
Oh, he did a few things here and there, right?
I think so. And I would say he's probably the better known name of those two.
Yeah.
Jerry Butler was a Chicago singer, the original lead singer of the Impressions, as Sean said. And he went on to great success as a solo artist as well, although he seems to be largely forgotten. And due to his vocal delivery being so cool and mellow, Jerry Butler had been dubbed the Iceman by a Philadelphia disc jockey named Georgie Woods, while Butler was performing in a Philadelphia theater, and the name stuck. So these guys were Jerry Butler's backing band, Jerry the Iceman Butler. So they were dubbed the Iceman's Band. And this is their only full-length release under that moniker. It was produced by all four members of the Iceman's Band.
Guys, we have a problem.
What's that?
See, when I was trying to do some research, I just typed in Iceman in Google. So all my notes here are on Richard the Iceman Kuklinski. You guys know who that is?
You should have just presented all those facts as if they were canon, and we should have just rolled with it.
Yeah, it'd be something to talk about in the future.
He was a hitman. That's why they called him the Iceman.
And do they call Jerry Butler the Iceman because he was just straight up murdering these tracks?
Oh, yeah, damn.
Presume.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right, cool. Well, there's the crossover.
Yeah.
We figured it out.
I actually saw a movie about that Iceman, but it wasn't by accident when I was researching this episode. It was a few years ago. They did make a movie about that Iceman, though. Jerry Butler, he was an entertainer and an entrepreneur. He was quite the entrepreneur, actually. He was very career-driven. He ended up being a Cook County commissioner from 1985 to 2018. But back when he was a vocalist, he thought if his backing band cut an album under their own name and established their own identity, he could book the Iceman's Band as one of his opening acts, as well as his backing vocal group, which was called Peaches, not to be confused with the Teaches of Peaches that we probably all remember from the 2000s. This was a group that consisted of Brenda Lee Ager, she was the lead singer of Peaches, as well as Deidre Tiggs, Carolyn Johnson, and Jerry Butler's sister, Maddie Butler. And Peaches never released a full LP, but did release some singles this same year, so you can see traces of this plan for both opening acts. I think I'm not 100% positive on this, but I think what he was planning was the Iceman's Band would come out and open the show as the opener, and then Peaches would join and do some solo or original songs of theirs, or songs that they had recorded. And then Jerry Butler would come out, kind of like the Talking Heads do on Stop Making Sense, where the band kind of builds up throughout the performance. If you've seen, I'm sure both of you have seen Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads.
I mean, I saw it for the first time maybe a year ago, but I have seen it.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I was way late to the party on that one, and I just don't know why, because I've loved the Talking Heads for a really long time.
Huh.
Wow, I didn't realize that. We should have watched that when we lived together.
Yeah, I know. It makes no sense why it took me so long to watch it, but whatever.
So I think that was kind of the idea, though, was to have this big, sort of like vertical integration almost, with, the concept of controlling all aspects of production. If everyone that's in his opening act is on his payroll, all the better. Mm-hmm. And so actually Peaches, the women singing in Peaches, are featured on a few cuts on here. It's not all just instrumental. And I'd like to play a version of the Jerry Butler hit single Never Give You Up that's on this album that features Peaches as well. Let's do that next. That's side 1, track 5.
I noticed when listening to this album, the biggest thing that jumped out to me was the production and how clean and how like right up front everything sounds. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but everything feels like very distinct and clean and simple. I'm not sure if that clicks with you guys, if that tracks, but
that makes sense, because that's kind of what you would need from a band that's primarily backing up a soul singer. You know, they can't be too busy, they can't be too flashy. They're there as, you know, the vehicle for the singer.
Yeah, and I think it's very direct. I think that's a good way of putting it.
But it's also much more jazzy than I would have ever expected. I don't own this record. I've seen it a bunch. I've never bought it because, honestly, I'm not the biggest Jerry Butler fan. I mean, I like him. I respect him. It's just not the vocal style that I usually get excited about. So I just assumed that this was a Jerry Butler record. And if I'd have known it was a really good soul jazz record like this, I would have bought it a long time ago, and definitely going to have to keep an eye out for it now.
Yeah, Jerry Butler is on the cover, like he's conducting them.
Right.
And they're all standing around like an old fire truck. And that one, the song we just listened to, was a big hit for Jerry Butler. It was written by him along with Gamble and Huff, the songwriting team credited with developing the Philly sound. Have you heard, either of you heard of Gamble and Huff?
Oh, yeah. Legendary songwriters.
Yeah. And it's funny because that version right there, I think it's essentially, you know, Jerry, you could almost like karaoke Jerry Butler over that version because it's like instrumental verses, but then the Peaches are singing on the chorus. At first I was kind of confused because I wasn't familiar with that hit song going into this record. And I was like, they sound really good, but like they don't feel like complete vocal songs. And then once I did more research, I realized, oh, it's because they're kind of giving you a taste of the song without Jerry Butler.
Yeah, totally.
That one reached number 20 for Butler, his vocal version on the Billboard charts in 1968, and appeared on his album The Iceman Cometh. Of course, he had to have an album with that name.
I do like that album. I've got that album, by the way.
Okay, I've heard, a few songs from it, but I need to check that out in full.
Yeah.
His version was recorded in Philly with Philly session players, but of course here, this is a few years later, this is 1972, and this is who was his backing band in that time. So let's talk about those players a little bit. On keys, we have Reginald Sonny Burke, and he also worked with artists like Stanley Turrentine, Dizzy Gillespie. I almost questioned the pronunciation of that.
For our listeners, they probably don't know because I edit out me sounding like a dumbass wherever possible. I missay that every time it comes up.
Gillespie. So yeah, Sonny Burke has worked with Stanley Turrentine, Dizzy Gillespie, and John Handy. He also wrote songs for another Chicago group called Earth, Wind, and Fire. We heard of them at all? Including Serpentine Fire.
Oh, okay. What's up?
Right.
Yeah, big connection. Also wrote for Dusty Springfield and Smokey Robinson. So
hell yeah,
he worked with some names. On drums we have Ira Gates. Did find a little info on Ira Gates, and I should say, I'll say this now. There is not a lot of information on this album or band. Like, there's not an All Music article. There's very little information, so I had to piece it together from Discogs information and a few interviews I was able to find. So kind of putting it all together here, this is kind of an I'd buy that for $1 original to some extent as far as how much information you're going to get on the Iceman's band. On drums, we have Ira Gates. He was born in Belzoni, Mississippi in 1941. He also worked with blues musicians such as Mississippi Charles Bevel and Mighty Joe Young, not to be confused with the movie Mighty Joe Young. He taught music at Malcolm X College in Chicago later on and passed away in October of 2001. As far as I could tell, all the other Iceman's band players are still with us. On bass, we have Wayne Douglas, and he played in a Chicago group called Black Magic. And around the time of this release, he was working with Jerry Peters from Black Magic, as well as with a jazz singer named Gloria Lynn. He did session work later with a number of artists, including Patti LaBelle. The guitarist, these players definitely worked with some other big names. The guitarist was the person I could find the most information about, and that's Robert Boogie Bowles. He has worked with the Pointer Sisters, Minnie Riperton, Tavares. He produced and arranged their number one hit, Check It Out, amongst many other things. He was also the guitarist on a little track by Gloria Gaynor called I Will Survive.
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Not the cake version, Jeremy. And he also worked with Yvonne Elliman. He's the guitarist on If I Can't Have You from the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
Now I feel the need to clear this up. I don't like cake. Okay, listeners? It's fine. I don't know why Peter said that. I don't really listen to Cake or like them.
Yes, and that's why I had to banter a little bit. Did I banter proper?
You did it
or were
well.
You just...
Yep.
Okay.
You effectively got under Jeremy's skin, so you did it. Good job.
Yeah, well done.
He did have to clarify things. But most notably, Robert Boogie Bowles, worked with Smokey Robinson for decades.
Okay.
He was his guitarist. He might, like, up until recently, or maybe still is even working with him. I don't know how active Smokey Robinson is today. Boogie put out a memoir a few years ago called Behind the Boogie, How I Became Guitarist for a Motown Legend. And unfortunately, I discovered this book yesterday in doing research for this episode. I only learned of this book yesterday, so I wasn't able to acquire a copy in time, but luckily you can sometimes do sneak previews of books, and I was able to get some information from it.
You got the Cliff Notes version?
I'm feeling the need to share this Smokey Robinson story because it was probably the worst concert I've been to. Definitely like top 5 worst concerts I've been to was Smokey Robinson about 5 years ago. And he was playing at like the San Diego Fair. And it was on this big like horse track or something because it's a fair. And he's up there just like talking about the good old days.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd talk for like 10 minutes. And then they'd play like a minute of one of his famous songs. And he wouldn't even finish it. He would just like play a recognizable amount of it. And then just kind of like start trailing off into talking about the good old days again.
That sounds like the best concert ever to me.
Oh, it was not good.
Well, I didn't realize we were taking down Smokey Robinson on this episode.
No, I like Smokey Robinson. That's why I was there. But
yeah,
it was disappointing to see. It's like I've heard Bob Dylan's not that bad nowadays, but I won't go and see because I
had I had a not great Dylan concert experience in 2004 where it was very underwhelming, and I've heard he can be hit or miss nowadays, but yeah, I haven't felt the need to try again. So I hear you. Boogie Bowles has the distinction of being the white member of Jerry Butler's Iceman's band. And yeah, Jerry Butler said people referred to Boogie as that bad white boy who used to play for him. And they would ask what happened to Boogie, and Butler would say that Smokey Robinson stole him away.
Dang.
Harsh. Epic rivalry.
Yeah. So I have a little info on Boogie. We'll talk a little bit about him just because he was the person I could find the most information about. He was born in Charleston, West Virginia in 1943, and he learned a few guitar chords growing up in a musical family. They moved to Jersey, and when he was in his early adolescence, they moved to Jersey. And at the age of 17, Boogie discovered jazz via Wes Montgomery. Hey, look at that. There's a tie-in to... I meant to mention that one of the reasons I picked the Beatles cover up front was because it kind of reminded me of when we did the A Day in the Life album by Wes. And, you know, first you get the verse that follows the song really closely, and then they start to stray off into that jazz territory. And at first I thought, I don't need to hear another version of Come Together. And then they started grooving, and I was like, oh, I think I'm going to feature this one on the episode.
Yeah, killer version.
Love those tie-ins.
Mm-hmm.
So Wes, yeah. So Wes Montgomery was kind of what got Boogie into jazz, and his love for jazz took him to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and he started kind of, you know, making his way around the music scene there and as well. And a black R&B singer named Jimmy Merritt asked Boogie to back him at a local club and gave him a stack of R&B records to learn specific songs by artists like Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Aretha Franklin, Joe Tex, James Brown, and Jerry Butler and the Impressions. And Boogie immediately felt an affinity for the music. And so, yeah, he gigged around Boston with various groups, and when a certain artist named Jerry Butler visited town, Boogie was approached to perform guitar for Butler for his Boston gig, and an offer which he, of course, accepted. And Butler was so impressed with Boogie that after the gig, he asked him to become the regular touring guitarist for his backing band. And Boogie actually says he was initially resistant as he was finishing his last semester at Berklee at the time, and told Jerry Butler he couldn't commit to anything else just yet, but he thanked Butler for the offer and gave him his address. And a few weeks later, Jerry Butler sent him a Christmas card asking if he was ready to go to work. And then Butler personally paid to fly Boogie into Chicago. And so Boogie took him up on the offer and became a part of Butler's backing band. And there are a number of stories that Boogie shares regarding his time working with Jerry Butler, which I think was 7 years, he said. I'm guessing it was around 1968 to 1975 or so that he was playing guitar for him. But one that stood out to me that I'd like to tell real quick is from 1970. Jerry the Iceman Butler had been invited to perform in Atlanta at a convention of the Congress of African People, a group that was a proponent of Black nationalism. And there were several influential members of the Black Power movement present, including Louis Farrakhan, who was scheduled to speak following Jerry Butler's performance. And although they had been assured by the promoters and organizers of the event that they would be fine, Jerry Butler started to express concerns about how the crowd might react to his interracial backing band. Of course, Sean, you talked about on the Chambers Brothers episode about how in the South in the late 60s and early 70s that you really couldn't tour as an interracial band in the South at that time.
Yeah, the Jim Crow laws were particularly harsh against interracial bands, it seems.
Yeah. So in this case, they're worried about the climate at this fairly radical Black Power event. And just before the band were about to take the stage, civil rights leader Whitney Young was booed off the stage, being called Whitey Young by the audience due to him possessing what some believed moderate views for a black leader. And so Boogie, the white guitarist Boogie, was nervous, but sucked it up and walked out on stage to set up his amplifier. As soon as the crowd saw him, people began shouting to get that Whitey off the stage. And Jerry Butler says that if it had been him, he would have packed his grip and said adios. But Boogie was a real trooper and plugged in his guitar and looked at Jerry and asked, "What are we going to do, Ice?" To which Jerry responded, "Get your crazy ass off stage before we all get killed." And the band bolted off stage. Jerry Butler did not perform, and Farrakhan went on to speak, and that was it for that event for them. Quite a story. I'd like to play another track at this point. I would like to hear the Iceman's band rendition of Mr. Dream Merchant, which is side 2, track 1.
That was a creepy breakdown in the middle there. What was
Yeah.
What was that about, Peter?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. I don't recall hearing, so this was another instrumental version of a Jerry Butler song, a song that Jerry Butler had recorded and had some success with in 1967, but I don't recall his version having that eerie, creepy breakdown necessarily, or at least not to the extent that it happens there. That bass part that we heard in that breakdown was sampled by Dr. Dre on The Chronic.
Whoa.
And yeah, I mean, and at Cypress Hill used a what do you call that? An interpolation where it's replayed. It's not you don't actually directly sample it, but they did a replayed version of that bass on one of their tracks as well. And you know, it definitely sets a certain tone, especially on like a hip hop track, is kind of menacing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got that dark stone soul jazz vibe going.
I like what Jeremy said about, Jeremy, you were saying you could pick up on the Wes Montgomery guitar tone influence on that one.
Yeah, I think they owe him some royalties just on the guitar tone alone.
Yeah. Boogie said that was kind of where his love for jazz came from. And, here's two soul jazz. I would argue this is a soul jazz record, just like the last one that we did.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So you're getting your fix of it, Sean.
Mm-hmm. I'm ready for more of it too. I don't give a damn.
Yeah, there's plenty of it out there for us to get into. I can't wait to do Ramsey Lewis.
Yeah.
Speaking of people who do Beatles soul jazz versions, I love the Rocky Raccoon that he does.
Definitely.
Sean, do you have some, speaking of being into this genre, do you have some recommendations for similar dollar bin records?
I sure do. So they're doing some organ sounds here and there on this record, which made me think of in my opinion, part of like the greats of organ soul jazz. You got brother Jack McDuff, who dropped a record in 1972, same year as this one. The record is called Check This Out. That's a really excellent record with some amazing drums on it. And pretty much anything Jack McDuff is doing, people can get into. Richard Groove Holmes is another legendary soul jazz organist that I highly recommend. And then Jimmy McGriff is another favorite of mine. He's got a record in 1971 that can be a little bit hard to track down called Groove Grease. But his stuff in general is all over the place and is worth keeping an eye out for. And then I don't always pay attention to this, but usually on Discogs, when you look up an album, if you scroll to the bottom of the page, they'll have their kind of like automatic recommendations, which sometimes is spot on and sometimes isn't. But I thought theirs were pretty interesting for this, so I'm just going to read them real quick. You got first up Donald Byrd's Street Lady on Blue Note, which is like a $20 to $30 album on Discogs, but I have definitely seen that in bargain bins a handful of times. And this whole era of late 60s, early to mid 70s Donald Byrd is a perfect comparison to this because it's got that hard jazz background, but moving into the soul and funk crossover and doing it perfectly. And then Discogs also recommends the album Sun Goddess by Ramsey Lewis, which we mentioned on the Earth, Wind, and Fire episode because it's basically Ramsey Lewis plus Earth, Wind, and Fire. And then another legendary keyboardist, Lonnie Liston Smith. His album Visions of the New World is a really good one, or pretty much anything that he was a part of. And then coming from the more soul and funk angle, I also recommend The New Birth, Coming From All Ends, which I definitely get behind that recommendation. And then Marvin Gaye's soundtrack work for the film Trouble Man is a really, really good one. So there you go. There's a whole list of recommendations to dig in on.
Wow. That's a whole lot of stuff that I don't know, so I'm going to look into it myself.
Perfect.
Peter, you said we needed to set the record straight.
Yeah, Jeremy.
On our new segment, Set the Record Straight with Peter Cook.
Yeah, so I'd like to introduce a section that we've kind of hinted at or joked about. We're going to call it For the Record. And we pride ourselves on making this a music history podcast that presents accurate information. But since it's conversation-based, every so often one of us will say something inaccurate, and usually we either catch it during recording or editing and excise the misinformation. But every so often something makes it to the final cut, and we just wanted to introduce this new section, For the Record, to set the record straight on I'd Buy That for $1.
All the mistakes are mine, right? It was all me.
Every single time.
Damn it.
Wait, really?
No.
Okay, I was like,
No.
I felt the same way. I was like, oh, he's just going to list all my errors. Cool.
Yeah.
No, and I did not specify who made these errors. I'm not going to focus on that. But some of them are me. So.
No, I want to know who made each error.
Yeah.
Yeah, listeners, go find these errors and give us a scoreboard since Peter won't tell us.
So on our Beach Boys Today episode, we mentioned that the song I'm So Young that appears on the album and is a cover of the doo-wop vocal group The Students we said that that was not a hit for the students. The song did actually make some noise. The students' version did make some noise on the U.S. Billboard R&B charts, reaching number 26 in 1961. So it did have some exposure. On our Cyndi Lauper She's So Unusual episode, we stated that Girls Just Want to Have Fun was written by Cyndi Lauper. While Lauper did write several songs on that album, Girls Just Want to Have Fun is not one of them. It was written by a guy named Robert Hazard, who recorded a demo in 1979. And his version was written from a male point of view. And one could argue that Cyndi Lauper definitely made it her own by changing it to a feminist anthem, much like Aretha Franklin had done with Otis Redding's Respect a decade and a half earlier.
Mm-hmm.
On our Roberta Flack Feel Like Making Love episode, we said that Killing Me Softly with his song was referenced in the intro to Old Dirty Bastard's Return to the 36 Chambers, the Dirty version, but it was actually the first time ever I Saw Your Face that ODB references in that cut. In that same episode, the Roberta Flack one, we also stated that there was this dispute between the individuals responsible for writing Killing Me Softly with his song about whether or not it was about witnessing Don McLean perform American Pie in concert. I also want to correct my pronunciation. It's Don McLean, not Don McLean, like I said on that episode. So I'm kind of giving away who made this error. So it was actually witnessing McLean perform the song Empty Chairs that Lori Lieberman, who released the first version of Killing Me Softly, was inspired by. The songwriters Charles Fox and Norman Gimbel backed this story for years. And in the late 90s, they began to change their story, perhaps in an effort to dismiss Lieberman's contributions to the song. She never received a songwriting credit for the song. I think she kind of gave them some ideas and they wrote the song. As of 2020, Lieberman said she is not seeking money or official songwriting credit. She just wants the world to know the correct origin of the song. So I wanted to correct our slight error in retelling that story. It was not American Pie that she witnessed Don McLean singing. It was the song Empty Chairs. In our Chambers Brothers episode on New Generation, when we were reading Lester Chambers' statement made in 2012, he said he did not receive any royalty payments between 1967 and 1994, not 1944. That would have been a reverse timeline there. And on our Diana Ross Diana episode, we mentioned the African-American Neil Diamond impersonator, the Black Diamond. His name is Theron Denson. I wanted to get his full name in there, Theron Denson. And he worked as an assistant to June Pointer. I don't know that he sang as a backing vocalist. So that wraps up For the Record, setting the record straight here on this episode of I'd Buy That for $1. I hope that everyone who's been sitting around yelling at us for all of that misinformation is satisfied.
I've been saying Hail Marys off mic since the beginning of this segment.
I know at least 2 of those were mine.
I think that sounds about right, but who's counting? Our listeners are counting.
I'm counting.
Them to.
I want to do better.
Well, only the strong survive, so we'll do better, Sean. And that leads me into the track I'd like to leave us with. Another one for Jerry Butler that was penned by Gamble and Huff and appears as kind of an instrumental / backing vocals version on the Iceman's Band, introducing the Iceman's Band. And I think that's about going to wrap things up here.
Excellent. I would just remind our listeners to not be afraid of instrumental albums. I think a lot of people don't buy them, but they're excellent for, even if you don't sit and listen, like they're great mood albums for when people are hanging out.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like you said about the Wes Montgomery album for salsa parties and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Los Indios Tabajares.
Oh, yeah. And occasionally there might be some vocals like on this album or Los Indios Tabajares, but, all the more fun. Well, I am Peter Cook. This has been I'd Buy That for $1.
I'm Jeremy Ruggles.
And I'm Sean Hartman. I wasn't going to go second. It had to be Jeremy.
I was waiting. I'm going to cut the silence out, but just so our listeners know, there was like a 30-second pause there because I was just waiting for Sean to start talking so I could jump in on him.
Yep, and I was just sitting here shaking my head. Nope, not going to be me. Not going to be me. I'm the main host of this show. I have to say my part last.
True.
Oh, we get into the hierarchy.
That's right. I'm top of the pile with this one, baby.
Only the strong survive. Let's hit it.
Just remember, I do the editing, so I wield the ultimate power.
Fair. All right.
Power.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening. We love you.
Side 2, track 3, Jeremy, if you didn't know.
Thank you for listening to another excellent episode of I'd Buy That for $1. We ask you to comment and review and rate the podcast on wherever you're hearing this. Surely there's like some stars or a little box where it's like, comment here. If you could just click something there, enter something in. We got a 1-star review, which I have on good evidence that is someone from our enemies list. So we need you to counterbalance that and leave us a beautiful 5-star review. Or not, if you don't believe that. But say something, rate us something. Okay, we'll see you next week. Thanks, bye.
I remember